Today's Cloudcast is sponsored by Datadog, a cloud-scale monitoring service that provides comprehensive visibility into cloud, hybrid, and multi-cloud environments with over 350 integrations. Datadog unifies your metrics, logs, and distributed request traces in one platform so that you can investigate and troubleshoot issues across every layer of your stack. Use Datadog's rich, customizable dashboards and algorithmic alerts to ensure redundancy across multi-cloud deployments and monitor cloud migrations in real time. Try Datadog for yourself with a free trial, and you'll receive a complimentary t-shirt. That 14-day trial can be found just by going to datadog.com/cloudcast. That's datadog.com/cloudcast.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Good to be back with everybody. Hope everybody is doing well as we continue to move through February. Let's jump right into Cloud News of the Week. Got a couple of interesting news and notes this week. First and foremost, want to congratulate our new friends and recent sponsors, UpCloud. They recently took a $18 million round of funding. It's going to help them expand out their ability to deliver simplified cloud services in more data centers around the world, as well as do some expanded hiring. So congratulations to that crew, and good to have them part of the Cloudcast community. Second thing was Snowflake, who also at one point had been a sponsor of the show, but has just been on a tear lately. Snowflake Computing, people that are really doing innovative work around cloud databases, just took a massive $479 million round of funding. You know, they're really kind of trying to reshape the data warehouse space, really kind of putting a dent in things like Amazon Redshift and other things. So hearing lots and lots of positive vibes about about Snowflake out there. So congratulations to them on a massive round of funding. Last week, we talked about both Amazon and Azure announcing their earnings, or I guess Amazon and Microsoft announcing the earnings for AWS and Azure, respectively. Just this past week, Google also announced their earnings. So their numbers, first time ever that Google really started to break out some of the things. They broke out the revenue numbers of YouTube, but also broke out the GCP numbers. And so their numbers were roughly on about a $10 million run rate, so about a $2 billion quarter. So about a $10 billion run rate for that, $8 to $10 billion, depending on how you looked at the numbers. But good to see, a little more transparency from them. Just like we've said about Microsoft in the past, Google as well. It is always good to see some transparency. I know to a certain extent there's probably a little bit of wanting to not talk about it until the numbers become materially big, and that's understandable. But good to see those numbers out there. And then finally, there was an interesting discussion that's been going on, obviously, around 5G. Everybody talking about 5G and expanded bandwidth in mobile wireless, really going to be a big game-changing thing. And obviously, the vendors and the people behind the technologies that are going to help build out that infrastructure are all, very interested in the decisions that are being made both at a company level, the carriers, what they're selecting, but also the government level. And it was interesting to see, the U.S. has been, very harsh on some of the concerns about Huawei and their involvement with the Chinese government and other things. We're not going to get into those politics. But it was interesting to see the British government, the UK government, kind of split from the U.S. approach. They've always been sort of Five Eyes, allies and partners, but they basically said they're not going to exclude Huawei completely from the 5G infrastructure around the UK. So interesting to see how much of a lighthouse that will be for other companies or countries around the UK, or whether or not the recent Brexit split, will sort of leave the UK literally and figuratively kind of on an island of their own in terms of technology choices, and how much that will impact other European countries and other major countries around the world. So definitely some interesting articles in the Cloud News of the Week that we will put out there, and congratulations to all the companies who took new rounds of funding. This week on the show, we're going to be diving into a topic that I know a lot of you have always been interested in. We tend to touch on it a little bit here and there because it's not an area that we have deep expertise, but we went off and grabbed one of our good friends, and we're going to dive a lot into AI and ML this week. And I will give folks a little bit of a heads up. The interview part of this show runs a little bit longer than usual, runs a little about 5 or 6 minutes longer than usual. So if you're listening to this in the car, you can relax a little bit. Don't worry about beating traffic. If you're listening to this while you're running, get an extra half mile in. It'll be good for you. And if you're listening to this, as many of you do, as the weather starts to warm up, if you're mowing the grass, get those lines a little bit straighter, make the yard look beautiful. So look forward to talking about AI right here after the break. Today's show is sponsored by MongoDB. As a programmer, you think in objects. With MongoDB, so does your database. MongoDB is the most popular document database built for modern application developers and the cloud era. Millions of developers use MongoDB today to power the world's most innovative products and services, from cryptocurrency to online gaming, IoT, and much more. Try MongoDB today with Atlas, the global cloud database service that runs on AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud. Configure, deploy, and connect to your database in just a few minutes. Check it out today at mongodb.com/atlas. That's mongodb.com/atlas. And we're back. And folks, as we teased just before the break, we're gonna dive into one of the topics that is always sort of fascinating to Aaron and I in terms of the breadth of it, the kind of the interestingness of what is evolving with the technology, and the fact that the technology, when it's done really well, gets out of the way, and the results are always the most important part of it. So very, very excited to have longtime friend of the show, the great Sam Charrington, is back with us. Sam, welcome back. How have you been?
I have been great. Thanks so much for having me back on the show.
Yeah, it is always good for us to catch up with you. Sometimes we see you on the road, and it's good to have you back on the show. You are, and for a long time have been, the host of the TWIML, or This Week in Machine Learning and AI podcast, as well as a lot of things that spin out of that. But for folks that maybe haven't heard you on the show before or aren't subscribers to your show, give us a little bit of your background and kind of the breadth of things you work on these days.
Yeah, absolutely. So for the past 8 or so years, I've been an independent industry analyst following broadly the key emerging technology trends that impact the enterprise. But about 3.5 years ago or so, I launched the podcast, what's now called the TWIML AI Podcast, as part of really digging into and focusing in on machine learning and AI, which have been an area that I've been interested for a while, but something just was happening in the air 3.5 years ago. And so I wanted to really immerse myself in it, started the podcast, and that has really precipitated a pretty dramatic shift in focus on my part. We are coming up on 350 episodes now. And so if someone wants to really immerse themselves in the world of AI and hear from some of the top technologists, thought leaders, et cetera, they could spend an hour a day every day for a year and catch up on all the shows. And that would be a great way to do it. But the podcast has led to a bunch of activities that have grown out of that. So last year we held our first conference. It's called TWIMLCon AI Platforms, really focused on the technologies and approaches that enterprises are applying and need to be aware of to really scale the way that they deliver ML and AI within their organizations. We're also really involved in education. So we host study groups and have put or helped support hundreds of people through online courses. We're launching a new study group around a course that IBM has up on Coursera called the AI Enterprise Workflow. We can talk a little bit more about that one. And, we've got a bunch of other interesting projects in the shoot. So it's been a really fun time for us.
Yeah. There's a couple of follow-ups I want to kind of hit on with that. One of them is, we've always been big fans of the work you've done. It's always incredibly high quality and interesting. One of the things we've always been jealous about, because you got started around cloud computing when we did, you made the shift to really kind of be more focused on AI and ML. As you look at the breadth of the things that you work on, we've always been a little bit jealous of it, because the Cloudcast always tends to be kind of technology centric. It's always new technology. And one of the great things that you do is you humanize it. You bring out so much, not only interesting people, but kind of the human impact of what it does, the things that you do, that you talk about and your guests talk about. So many of them are not just, what's interesting in inferencing or how do you manage large amounts of data. It's like, how am I helping farmers? How am I helping, change climate? How am I helping other stuff? And that's got to be an interesting aspect, beyond the technology.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting aspect for, everyone that's working in the field. And there are, I think that's why the field is so exciting now. There are lots of opportunities to apply machine learning and AI in really interesting ways that have, potentially huge impact. And by the way, there are also potential negative impacts, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on, I think. But there's a lot of really, really interesting applications of ML and AI. I don't know if you heard that buzzing.
Yeah, we'll take it out.
Yeah, there are a lot of really interesting applications of machine learning and AI, ranging from, very kind of pedestrian types of enterprise use cases, predicting churn and, what's the next best offer, that kind of thing, to, one of my recent shows was with the CTO at a company that is really focused on making agriculture more efficient, and in doing so, helping to ensure global food security.
Yeah, and that stuff is always incredibly powerful, and it makes you step back and think. It's where can we start to apply these technologies to be, not only for cost savings or productivity, but kind of a broader good and so forth. So yeah, again, thank you for what you do around that space, and it's a fascinating thing for anybody interested. You mentioned you've done this for a number of years now. It's 350 odd shows. We have a similar challenge in that people sometimes come to us and they go, this space feels so broad, we're not always sure where to start. Do you kind of have a mental framework in your head? If somebody were to come to you and say, hey, it's 2020, I'm kind of new to this space. If I started with your show, it kind of covers a million things. Like, how do you think about it? Is there a framework, both from a technology perspective or solving business problems, that you kind of have in the back of your head for how you might introduce somebody new to the space?
That is a really good question, and building something around that, or I've long thought that we need to have a roadmap on our website so that someone can go there and there's like a start here page that kind of walks them through different shows to listen to kind of streamline the process of getting caught up. I think for a lot of people, there are, it really starts with kind of getting a broad brush sense of, what some of the things are, some of the interesting things happening in the field are. And, for that, I would recommend someone just kind of look at our shows page and kind of, pick some titles that sound interesting. But then, at a level beyond that, the broad categories that folks are investing a lot of time and interest in are computer vision, so the use of deep neural networks to allow us to identify objects in photos, to caption photos, to do some of the same things with video, to take an image and, change the way it looks through style transfer. There is a ton of interesting things happening in the image domain, broadly referred to as computer vision. And then there's similar set of things happening in natural language processing. So this is everything to do with, taking text and, trying to understand what that text is about, summarizing it, identifying the key terms, categorizing documents based on their text. There's a broad set of use cases around, what I refer to broadly as traditional machine learning, but, there's a lot more nuance under that. But, this is more like trying to make predictions based on structured data. Some of the use cases I mentioned earlier, like predicting churn or predicting, what the thing that the customer is most likely to buy or might be interested in, falls under, these types of models. Within NLP, there's also conversational systems and bots. There's a set of really interesting activity happening around technology called reinforcement learning. It is often seen the research around it often happens in the context of video games, like training an agent to play a video game, like an Atari game. But it is starting to find real enterprise use, particularly around industrial use cases like robotics. And so, I like to lay out those kind of broad use case areas. And, within each of those use case areas, we have, tons of shows about each of them. And then, separate from the use cases, there's a whole vertical approach to looking at things. And, ML and AI obviously plays in, all of your traditional industries like, finance and healthcare and drug development and many others. And so, with those kind of two dimensions, it's folks can kind of start to narrow in on what their interests are and then, really dive in, and then there's, just kind of broad, we have a lot of folks that listen that are kind of just broadly technically curious about different things that are happening. And we cover a lot of topics just from a broad technical perspective.
Yeah. As you're talking about that, what I'm hearing a lot of is, you talk about computer vision, you talk about, people going through, lots and lots of texts and trying to make inferences. And, it seems to me like when we first kind of were hearing about big data and it becoming commercialized, it was Hadoop and doing batch jobs in larger, more efficient ways. And now it really seems like, the technology has become much more focused around, kind of the world around us. How do we better build models that analyze the world around us, understand kind of the changing nature of things, at a visual level, at a, how do I quickly get up to speed on something historically? And again, a lot of those come from, your ability to store more data at an efficient rate. Bandwidth is more highly available, access to computing that's on demand. All those things start to make more and more capabilities, make them happen. For those people that are like looking at this and they go, hey, I'm more on the technology side. I'm really curious as to, what happens under the covers on that. What are some of the, you talked about NLP, you talked about some other stuff. What are some of the technologies that maybe have become kind of mainstream, and really, really viable as opposed to kind of experimental that are making those things happen that people might want to kind of go learn about, experiment with, and so forth?
Yeah, there's been a ton of maturity that's happened over the past year or two or N years. I think in computer vision, the models that folks have developed, and computer vision in particular, the activity has largely been around these deep convolutional neural nets that have kind of blown out all of the traditional computer vision benchmarks in terms of their, accuracy for tasks like object detection. And so that's kind of the core algorithm or model that, continues to advance. On the natural language processing side, the, new hotness, if you will, is in a type of model called transformer models. You may have heard about GPT-2, which is a model that caused a little bit of a stir last year when OpenAI said that they had developed it but wouldn't share any of the details around it because they said it was too dangerous. There are other kind of variants of these transformer models, but basically they're basically language models. They allow you to train on a bunch of textual data, and then these language models can kind of, given a prompt, generate textual data based on the data that they've been trained on. And they have found their way into a great many NLP use cases. And then on the reinforcement learning side, there's a lot of interesting work happening around kind of different, subvariants like model-based reinforcement learning. There's just a ton of stuff happening in the field. We do these study groups that I mentioned where we host, they're largely volunteer oriented. We'll have these kind of volunteer hosts that will kind of work with cohorts of learners or organize cohorts of learners to take some of the popular online courses around machine learning. So we've done them for, there are these courses that we really like, produced by an organization called Fast.ai or Fast AI. And they've got one that has been really popular in our community called Deep Learning for Coders. Basically, the premise of this course is, unlike some of the other deep learning courses, it's not going to start at the bottom with math and kind of, get you to implementing a model. From the very first day of this course, it starts with, your ability to code in Python, and it kind of works its way down from, actually building world-class models, from the very beginning of this course. And so we've probably helped hundreds of, I don't know the exact number, but we've done a bunch of different study groups around these courses, had hundreds of participants. And they're a great way to really dig into, if you've got some coding background but don't know any of the math, they're a great way to kind of get started, building deep learning models, again, from the kind of very beginning with these courses.
Yeah, no, that's very cool. I like that it's you're taking your expertise and your ability to kind of build around communities and then taking these other fundamental building blocks that are out there and kind of bringing the two of them together, right? It's that's very, very cool. So, I mentioned earlier, we've known each other for a while. We both you were doing other things, but we both kind of started around this space, when cloud computing got going, and whether it's cloud computing or DevOps or AI and ML, they're all, they're fundamentally new. And when things are fundamentally new, there's an element of change that's involved for the people that are going to engage with the technologies or use the outputs of them. Have you found anything unique around AI and ML, maybe different than when you were doing stuff with DevOps or early cloud computing, just from how do people adapt to change, or kind of culturally or process-wise that people really need to be aware of as they're, either implementing these technologies or using them as part of their business process?
Yeah, one of the things that I've been spending a lot of time on over the past year and change actually parallels the rise of DevOps, and it is the rise of, some people are calling it ML ops. In fact, the idea is that even in the previous, just a moment ago, I spent a lot of time talking about different machine learning models, but there's been an increasing appreciation over the past year or two that, while as an industry, we've kind of over-indexed on, talking about the models and developing new types of models, really in order to get value out of these models. The model is just a small piece of the overall system and process that's required to extract value. And so I wrote an entire ebook on this, the definitive guide to machine learning platforms. This was the topic of our conference, TWIML AI platforms. The idea that in speaking to some of the leading adopters of machine learning, one of the things that they all had in common was they had these established set of processes and technologies that supported their data scientists and machine learning engineers in getting models into production, kind of end to end. So they had, processes and technology in place to support, acquiring and managing data, processes and technologies in place to support running and managing the results of experiments, and then processes and technologies in place to support actually taking the resulting models and getting them into production and managing them over the full life cycle. And so, what's interesting there coming from, cloud and DevOps is this transition that's happening where initially, say, 4 years ago, we would talk about this kind of unicorn data scientist that was like a, ninja coder and knew everything about statistics, knew everything about the business. And now we're starting to see the same kind of, transition in roles as we saw, with the rise of the DevOps engineer and SREs and things like this, where now we've got a new role that's starting to emerge, particularly in Silicon Valley, but also elsewhere, of machine learning engineers that work with data scientists, but are more looking at problems from an engineering perspective, understand distributed systems, understand, the hardening and productionalization of models, and kind of building the infrastructure that supports all of that.
Very cool. Very, very cool. This is one of those questions I know it's going to be a it depends answer, and I'm not looking for sort of an exact number, but if somebody comes to you, and again, you've been kind of around this space for a while, you've seen a lot of projects, you've heard a lot of stories of it. If somebody comes to you and says, "Hey, here's a business problem we have, and we wish that if we could use some of these new technologies to give us better insights into it, maybe not solve the problem, but get better insights into it, how long would it take for us to be smarter about it, or have an actionable outcome?" Is there any way? Is there any framework or any sort of line of thought about how do you put a timeline or a budget around making these things happen? It's sort of an impossible thing, but I'm curious, like, maybe what are the big areas that you need to consider in that, in terms of budget, or is it how much data you have, or the number of data scientists? What are all those variables?
The answer is always 3, but I won't tell you the units. It's as you imagine, it's really tough to say. The biggest question is, do they have the data?
Yeah.
Like, a lot of folks will identify problems that would be high value problems to solve within their organizations. And, the first question that they need to ask is, do we have the data that will, allow us to solve this problem? And if not, where do we get it? Do we have to start instrumenting our, systems and applications? That's a long road. Do we have to go to, third parties to, acquire the data via partnership or purchase? Without the data, there's not a lot that they can do. That's the kind of starting place. And so the big determinant of how long something is going to take is just the access to and availability of that data.
Yeah.
The other thing that comes up in talking to ML, the folks that lead ML and AI organizations, that I think is one of the most challenging aspects of their jobs, is really managing a portfolio of projects and kind of getting that portfolio right. For a lot of them, it is important to them to both pursue these low-hanging fruit types of projects that offer, relatively immediate impact to the business. Certainly, once you have, you've got your, data management infrastructure in place, like if you've got a data warehouse and you've got a data science team, there's probably a long list of problems within your company that are, modest risk, modest reward, right? It's like you can send a data scientist or a data scientist working with someone on the business side off for, a couple of months and kind of, build out a model, get something into production that's going to deliver value to the enterprise, relatively quickly. But it's kind of modest value. It's going to solve somebody's problem, but it's not going to be like a game changing, innovation,
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's important for these organizations, as they're asking, their senior leadership for, millions of dollars to, hire the best and brightest and to build infrastructure, to also make progress on kind of these bigger projects that are more, inspirational and aspirational, and get the organization focused on, what the transformational opportunities are out there. In a lot of ways, this is, the same thing that I'd be talking about in the context of cloud computing, 7 years ago, right? It's like, yeah, you can, look at cloud as a way to reduce your, the cost of delivering IT, but you could also look at it as a transformational opportunity to, drive agility and to create new products and to create new revenue streams. And I think folks are kind of, juggling the same thing and in many ways learning the same lessons on the ML AI side.
Yeah. No, you could definitely replace the words AI and ML with things like, we looked at the project, unless we could totally scope the thing out or do it as a big bang, we didn't want to get started. And then yet there's stories all day long of people who went, hey, we just kind of got started. We started with something like you said that was, medium risk, medium reward, or even, low risk, low reward. But we kind of built up the muscles to do it. We learned what it meant to have the right data infrastructure, to have, even just data scientists on staff, or, knew how to find data models. So yeah, I think a lot of the same principles that we learned with cloud, either in success or in failure, definitely apply to those two things. One quick follow up on that point. Do you find that obviously, if you have your own data, even if it's not been instrumented, is one thing. It's a great starting point. Is the marketplace for data sources rich enough that people are actively out buying data sources from other places? Is that a thing, or is that still kind of a niche?
I think it's definitely a thing. I don't think it's a thing the way I might have thought it would be a thing. The marketplaces are hard. Like,
right.
Kind of going back to the cloud analogy, like I think, if we had a conversation, 6, 7, 8 years ago, we all would have predicted by now that there would be these kind of robust cloud brokerages, and you'd be able to go and kind of, just find someone's kind of excess compute and, that would be driving down the cost of cloud. It hasn't really happened like that. And I think, a lot of people are pursuing the same kind of thing on the data side. Like there'd be these robust kind of, the eBay of data.
Right.
Now there are definitely data, providers, and, a lot of these are companies that kind of have developed a single kind of a small number of proprietary data sources. There's I'm trying to remember the name of the company. I think it was like Clearview or something like that. It's been in the news recently. Basically, they have gone and scraped photos off of
social
media sites, and are selling these, access to these photos, in a model that can do like face detection based on kind of this scraped data. They're selling it to a law enforcement organization. That is kind of an example of what we're talking about. I think, often what we're seeing now, as much as anything, is as opposed to kind of selling the data, organizations are saying, well, I don't necessarily need to sell the data. I can build models off of the data and sell access to the models, and in doing so kind of provide more value. Another example of this is I mentioned my recent interview with Nemo Semret, who's the CTO for this company Grow Intelligence, that provides essentially market intelligence for kind of agriculture and food industry, and they collect millions and millions of data points. I think the number of data series they have now is 55 million. And they're doing things like they're going out to, provincial governments in, countries like China, and, getting the PDF documents where they're tracking, rice production in that province, and, scanning it and producing, putting that into a data series. And then they're, building products on top of that, like agricultural yield models that, both farmers that are trying to figure out what they should grow and future prices, as well as, the folks that are, buyers, as well as governments, can use to try to understand this market. So I think there's definitely a lot of a lot of that type of thing happening. But it's just it's taking a different form than what we may have thought it might.
Yeah. No, and I agree with you. Marketplaces are hard. Everybody's tried to do a marketplace, and for some odd reason, they are just always harder than they seem on the surface. I'm going to ask you one last question, which could easily become an entire show by itself, or probably a series of shows. But I'll ask you for maybe like the TLDR version. You hinted on earlier in the show about AI and ML can be a force for really interesting use of technology, a force for sort of good. It also has the possibility of creating some problems. Obviously, we've seen some things happen. You highlighted a few. If you were kind of giving, kind of what you've learned over the last few years, what are some of those big areas that people maybe should pay attention to, whether it's just implied or unimplied bias, or just bad actors? What are some of the areas that are kind of the downside, the dark side of maybe what's happening with AI and ML, or how it could be used?
I think the big one that is typically the first place that people start to talk about is the idea that machine learning and deep learning, what models are inherently good at and what makes them powerful is that they identify patterns in the data on which they're trained. And those patterns, pick up biases that are in that data, and all training data is, biased in some way or another, right? And so, for example, there have been tons of examples of this in, say, natural language processing, where, you train a language model on a bunch of existing writing, that biased humans wrote. And then you give it a problem like, man is to lawyer as woman is to, and this model spits out homemaker or something like that.
Right.
And it's really surfacing the biases that are in the training data. And you have the same kind of thing in computer vision as well. And the biases, there are all different kinds of biases. There are biases, like the one I described, where you've got these, you've kind of got, historical biases in the associations between different things. There are also biases in terms of, representation within different data sets. So an organization that calls itself the Algorithmic Justice League did a test of different facial recognition services' ability to correctly predict the gender of sample of images that they submitted, and the services performed much worse on African American subjects than white subjects, and that has a lot to do with the lack of a diverse sample within the data. So
right.
This issue of data bias is where folks typically start, because it's kind of part and parcel, fundamental to the problem, and you need to really be thinking carefully about the biases that might be inherent in your data, when you're, solving any problem. Just the show, kind of taking that a step further, the show that we just put out yesterday is with a PhD researcher called Abuba Berhane, and she wrote this paper called Algorithmic Injustices Toward a Relational Ethics. And the premise of this paper is that, the way we typically approach AI ethics is from a technical perspective, looking at, technically identifying bias and, technically measuring fairness and all these kinds of things. And her premise was, rather what we should be doing is we should be looking at all of these questions from the perspective of, who are the most vulnerable populations that these different technologies impact, and how do they impact them? And, asking the questions, should these technologies exist? How should they be governed, et cetera? So applying that to something like, facial recognition, there's, lots of great, use cases for, or computer vision generally, right? Lots of great, kind of use cases that, add to, society and make society function more smoothly. But there's also, if you look at, a situation in like China, where you've got this population called the Uyghurs in, northwestern China, that is a Muslim population that is being kind of systematically,
silenced, eliminated,
silenced, eliminated, rounded up into concentration camps, et cetera. Putting, adding facial recognition, into that whole mix, is not a good thing, right? So I think these are really challenging questions, and I think the starting place for kind of responsible use of AI is to really think carefully about the way the technologies that you're developing are used both intentionally but could be used unintentionally.
Yeah. Sam, I'm gonna wrap up with that. This has been, as I mentioned at the top of it, you're one of our favorite people just because of the depth and quality of everything you bring to this community. We want to thank you for your time today. We talked a lot about the different ways that people can dive into this space, whether it's the podcast, the conference, the teaching groups. We will get all that in the show notes for anybody who's listening, so you don't have to remember them. They will be right there in the show notes for you. Any sort of last comments about things that you'd like people to kind of remember? Absolutely, we want everyone to spend a year, go out, subscribe to the show, spend the next year digging into this stuff. But Sam, any last comments to folks who are new to this space or interested in this space?
Well, I would just say check out our website at TWIMLAI.com. Follow me on Twitter and social media generally at Sam Charrington at TWIMLAI. I would definI think I said this last time, I'll say it again, both you and Aaron, are an inspiration for me. And, I had several conversations with Aaron as I was considering launching the podcast, and you as well. And kind of likewise, mutual feelings. I really appreciate what you have both been doing with the Cloudcast, and really excited to be back on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, thank you for the time, folks. We can't recommend the stuff that Sam does highly enough. But with that, we're going to wrap it up, and we will talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.